Well, as with virtually all biblical events that include interactions with God or supernatural interventions, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is one that has been claimed fictitious, and thus archaeological verification of this event would be very supportive of biblical apologetics. Now, the estimated date from biblical scholars and archaeologists for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah have varied. Archbishop Usher estimated that the destruction occurred in the year 897 BC. Thomas Robinson suggested a date of 1896 BC. Merrill Unger gives a date of 2065 BC, but the latest estimate for the destruction of Sodom, that is, if we assume a mid-15th century BC date for the Exodus, is 2070 BC. Well, again, this event has been challenged significantly by liberal scholars. In their textbook, A History of Ancient Israel and Judah, Miller and Hayes asserts that the story of the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah was copied from secular myths. They say, the Sodom and Gomorrah story reflects yet another motif pattern known from extra-biblical literature, that of divine beings who visit a city to test the hospitality of its people and eventually destroy the inhospitable city. One can compare in this regard the Greek myth of Bacchus and Philemon. The presence of such traditional motifs in the biblical narratives raises the possibility that at least some of these narratives are purely products of the storyteller's art, which of course raises serious questions about their usefulness for historical reconstruction. Well, let's look a little bit at the text. Genesis 13:13 tells us why the city was destroyed. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. Remember, the angels appeared to Abraham and warned him of the coming destruction. And you remember that Abraham, when the men leave to go to the city, Abraham stops and talks to the Lord and gets into a little debate with them. Asks him, what if there are 50 people found in this city that are righteous? Would you still destroy the city? And he says, no, of course I would not do this. And he says, what if there are less than 50? He said, I won't even destroy it if there are 45. What if there's 40? No. What if there's 30? No. What if there's 20? No. Brings them all the way down to 10 people. But apparently there weren't even 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you have, the angels go to Lot, do you have anyone else here, sons-in-laws, sons or daughters, or anyone else in this city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we're going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. Then the Lord God rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, including all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. A terrible destruction took place. Well, Sodom and Gomorrah were the two of the 5 cities referred to in Scripture as the cities of the valley. Sodom and Gomorrah were 2 of these 5 cities, referred to as cities of the valley. Based on a number of biblical references, we can conclude that they were in the valley of the Dead Sea. Now, these cities have been typically viewed as being in the valley in the southern end of the Dead Sea. However, many now argue and place it in the northern end of the Dead Sea. So we want to look at both of these claims to see which might be the truth. Let's look at some biblical references to help with our geography. Genesis 13, 1 through 4. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the Negev. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold, and he journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. Well, I'm going to locate for you here the locations of Bethel and Ai as best as I could on this image. from Genesis 13, 10, and 11. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. So east is in that direction. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Well, this map from 1692 is a map of the ancient Holy Land from Philip Lee, shows the destroyed cities of the valley lying under the current waters of the Dead Sea. And this was a popular view up until recently. This view, however, was refuted, at least in part, during the construction of the salt drying beds in the southern end of the Dead Sea. A lot of people don't know that they have walled off great portions of the Dead Sea and are using these as dehydration beds for the production of salt. You can see in this image the construction of those salt drying beds from 1972 up to 2001. And if you look close, this is from a satellite view, you can see the walls visible there in the Dead Sea. And if you go to take a tour to Israel and you go to the Dead Sea and stay at one of the hotels near the Dead Sea, where you're staying is in the region of these salt drying beds. So the water at those locations is a much higher concentration of salt than you're going to find in the northern region. And this is the area where people will go out and float in the Dead Sea. The water is such a high concentration that you can't sink. And actually, they tell you not to even put your head under the water because the salt concentration is so high that even a little bit of that in your eyes, and you're making your way to shore with your eyes closed, trying to find some water to wash out your eyes. But it's in this region where those salt drying beds are that people go out and swim and float in this way. Well, during this massive construction project, no archaeological evidence of these cities were found, so I think it can be concluded that those cities were not under that area of the Dead Sea at least. Can't speculate about the area north of that, but at least the construction of those drying beds, I think, conclusively showed that there were no cities at that location. This map from Carl Spruner's 1965 map of the Holy Land shows Sodom and Gomorrah on the southern shore, with the Valley of Salt, the Vallis, here identified as the Vallis Saranarum, and Zoar, one of the 5 cities of the valley, on the southeastern coast. Now, Zoar is itself important for locating Sodom and Gomorrah because it was to that city which Lot and his daughters fled to within a day. Read here in Genesis 19, 15 to 17. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of this city." But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." Continuing, and Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me, and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved." He said to him, "Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there." Therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar, which refers to, Zoar means small. Continuing, the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So note that Lot was able to travel to Zoar within a day, which places it in close proximity to Sodom. Traveling from Sodom to Zoar between dawn, it says in Genesis 19:15, and noon in 19:23. Continue on. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and towards all the land of the valley, and he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. Well, the location where Abraham looked and saw the smoke rising was Hebron, shown on the map here. And, well, this doesn't really help us in favoring the northern versus the southern location of these cities, since it's about halfway between the northern and southern valleys there of the Dead Sea. But the text continues, describing that Lot subsequently fled to the mountains near Zoar, where he and his daughters lived in a cave. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent out Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. Now Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his two daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar, so he lived in a cave with his two daughters. Well, the most important source we have for locating Zoar, and thus hopefully the proximity of Sodom and Gomorrah, is a map that was found in Medaba, Jordan. Now this is found inside of this 6th century church. It's a mosaic map on the floor. Now this is a Byzantine era church, again in Jordan, and the map depicts Palestine in the 6th century. The church is itself located right here next to the Dead Sea, so you would assume it's a pretty good source for the geography of the Dead Sea. The map that is shown here details the region around Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. If you'll notice, Dead Sea is there in the foreground, and in the background, that's the Dead Sea. And you can see the River Jordan coming into the Dead Sea. Well, on the southeast shore of the Dead Sea, the location of Zoar is shown, and the location of what is identified as the sanctuary of St. Lot, a church said to have been built in memory of Lot in front of the cave, thought to be where Lot and his daughters lived after fleeing from Zoar. Well, the existence of the sanctuary of St. Lot, shown in the Medaba map, was eventually discovered in 1983. Archaeological excavations between 1989 and 1993 identified both the sanctuary of St. Lot, as is known, and a stone bearing the inscription St. Lot inside the cave. The church was built on the side of the cave traditionally held to be where Lot and his daughters lived. In 2012, the Lot's Cave Museum, shown here, opened to the public. Well, Bryant Wood is the research director of the Associates for Biblical Research and has proposed a southern location for Sodom and Gomorrah, operating on the very reasonable assumption that the sanctuary of St. Lot was built to preserve the actual location of the cave where Lot had lived. So he has put forth several ancient town sites as being the biblical cities of the plain, mentioned in Genesis 19, with Ben-Hadrah and Numera identified as Sodom and Gomorrah. He argues for a linguistic connection that can be to connect Numera and Gomorrah. Many times the ancient names are preserved in modern Arabic place names, and the consonants of the name Gomorrah and which MR and the consonants of Numera are shared. Ben-Hadrah, one of those cities, has been heavily explored by archaeologists and includes, here's a schematic of it, showing both the town site and the cemeteries. There was occupational areas to the east and south and west of the city walls as well. The main burial area there, the cemetery that was used throughout more than 1,000-year history of the town, has an estimated 20,000 tombs that would have held approximately 500,000 people and over 3 million pottery vessels. Here's an enlarged view of Ben-Edra, the town site. Although the northern wall was lost due to erosion, it is estimated that the town site, the fortified area of the town site, was about 9 to 10 acres, which is typical. Most of the towns in antiquity were, in the 6 to 10 acre size, at least the fortified portions. Townships or, people would dwell outside the fortified areas, but this was typical of the size of cities in antiquity. Here's shown some remains of the city wall of Ben-Edra, which again is argued to be Sodom. Here's another of with the city wall. And if you look closely, you can note the proximity of the mountains in the background. Remember, the angel told Lot to flee the mountains or you're going to be swept away. Now, mountains close by. Brian Wood, again, the archaeologist who put this forth, comments on the findings in the Journal of Bible in Spade. He says, shortly thereafter, at the close of the early Bronze III period, the fortified city of Ben-Edra met a final fiery end. The northeast gate was destroyed by fire, as indicated by charcoal, broken and fallen bricks, and areas of ash. There was a massive pileup of mud bricks in the west end, suggesting heavy destruction in this part of the city. At this time, the city wall fell, and the mud brick superstructure of the sanctuary collapsed, apparently after burning. Following the destruction, there was an occupation at Ben-Edra in the early Bronze IV period, but almost exclusively outside the destroyed fortified town. Following this brief period of extramural settlement, the site was permanently abandoned. Shown here are excavations at Numera, as it appeared during the 1977 season of excavation. It was occupied for less than a century, but the remains were better preserved at Numera than at Ben-Edra. Textiles, string, rope, seeds, and even clusters of grapes survived amazingly well. Every room was filled with ash and burnt debris. 2 victims of the destruction of Numera were unearthed. These 2 skeletons were found adjacent to the east tower, lying in ashy debris and buried under collapsed stones from the tower. Michael Coogan, one of the excavators at Numera, described what the archaeologists encountered. He says, under the topsoil, the desert pavement, and a naturally deposited windblown sandy soil, the entire area was covered by the ashy debris of the final destruction of the town, up to 0.4 meters in depth. This ash contained fragments of wooden beams that had supported the roof of the dwellings and lay immediately over the latest occupational layer within each room, sealing the material beneath. Not infrequently, there was mud brick debris over the ash, which had resulted from the collapse of the mud brick superstructures after the final conflagration. So, could Sodom and Gomorrah be there in the southern end where Bryant Wood proposed? Steve Collins proposed another site in the north end of the Dead Sea. He is a professor at Trinity Southwest University and has a PhD in biblical history and religion. And again, he is arguing for a different location for Sodom and Gomorrah, which today appears most favored by archaeologists. Collins identifies this tell, called Tel El Hammam, as Sodom. Now, what a tell is a hill that people come to recognize was not a natural hill, but actually a city. Centuries of occupation of cities caused these cities to eventually get higher and higher and higher. Often they were built on an elevated area anyway for defensive purposes, but as the city was occupied over centuries, it would get built up higher and higher and higher and higher until it was actually a massive mound. I mean, even think about Seattle. Have you ever seen underground Seattle? Seattle was destroyed, and they built Seattle right on top of that. Well, that's what they did. You had one city destroyed, by fire or, a war, and you would build right on the top of that, and then build right on the top of that. And some of these cities were occupied for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's what a tell is. So this is Tel El Hammam. Now, this tell is located in a fertile area where it is still farming today. As you can see from this picture, you can see farmlands in the surrounding areas around this tell. Tel El Hammam is located about here, just north of the Dead Sea. Now, Genesis 13, which we read before, describes the region where Sodom and Gomorrah was located, in the Jordan Valley, and calls the cities of the valley. However, the Hebrew word translated as valley is the word kikar, which literally means circle or disc. This translation, Collins argues, better describes the area to the north, shown here, which includes Jericho. However, it should be noted that we do not know whether the Dead Sea filled the southern basin to the extent that it does today, where the salt drying beds are during the time of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Could there have been a larger plain there during that time? It's possible. The location of the upper and lower tells of El Hammam are identified for you here. A view taken as you look north from Mount Nebo, the place where Moses was granted a view of the Promised Land. Tel El Hammam is located for you here. It was a major hub for commerce, shown by trade routes that made this city an important location in antiquity. Now, Collins provides a schematic to describe the history of the development and occupation of Tel El Hammam. This shows the walls, towers, and buildings found during the Middle Bronze 1 and 2 periods, dating between 1950 to 1540 BC, which then saw a sudden collapse around 1600 BC, and was almost completely unoccupied during the late Bronze 2A period, which would be like 1350 BC, with some renewed occupation during the late Iron Age 2 and 3. That would be 1000 BC to 330 BC. Now, this graphic shows the relative size of occupation of Tel El Hammam, designated by the bar color thickness and width. Following the Middle Bronze Age, a dramatic collapse occurred around 1600 BC, and little to no occupation was found during the late Bronze 2A period, again 1350 BC. However, remember that the latest estimate for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah puts it at 2070 BC, rather than 1600 BC. Is this the location of Sodom? Possibly. It's certainly possible that the assigned dates are wrong. I mean, natural science is wrong about the age of the earth by about 4.6 billion years. So being almost 500 years off in the dating of the late Bronze Age does not seem like much of a stretch. So could it be the location of Sodom and Gomorrah and then the dates are just horribly off? I think we should give that strong possibility. Well, other than the tradition of placing its location in the southern valley of the Dead Sea, there are a few problems with assigning Sodom to the northern location. And perhaps the most significant is the distance between Tel El Hammam and Zor, identified by the cave of St. Lot in the southern region. Now remember that Lot traveled from Sodom to Zor between dawn and noon. Well, the distance between Zor and Ben Hedra is in the southern region is only about 16 miles, which is doable in that length of time. But Zor to Tel El Hammam in the northern location, identified by Steve Collins, is on the order of about 50 miles through difficult terrain, a distance much too far to traverse in a few hours. However, personally, I'm not sure there's good, credible reasons for assuming this cave was occupied by Lot fleeing Sodom. The sanctuary and the map found at Medaba, Jordan, were likely built around the same time, the 6th century. When we consider that the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah occurred at 2070 BC, you're talking about 2,600 years later for the building of this sanctuary at the location of that cave and the map. It could very well be that it was just a cave found near the Dead Sea and became popularly known as Lot's Cave. And then after the locals called it Lot's Cave for a significant period of time, someone assumed that the tradition must be true, and they built a sanctuary at that location. Just not sure there's good, credible reason to assume that that cave was the location of Lot's dwelling. People in antiquity were really, really concerned about preserving the locations of tombs, but preserving the location of a cave where someone lived, I just don't see that to have been held to by the local peoples there for such a tremendous length of time. And in fact, many maps have Zoar located on the northern end of the Dead Sea. The map on the far left is the one I showed you previously, which has the cities of the plain located underneath the Dead Sea. It has Zoar located there on the northern end. When doing some research earlier for this, I found other maps that have Zoar located there on the north. Other maps locating Zoar on the northern end. Oddly, though, Steve Collins' map of Tel El Hammam has one of the trade routes leaving Tel El Hammam going to Zoar in the southern end. I think it's more probable that if Tel El Hammam is the location of Sodom, that Zoar is amongst the other cities of the plain located near there, but near enough to be reached by Lot, but not destroyed in the actual destruction of those cities. Although, again, I don't think there's good reason to reject this location as being Sodom and Gomorrah. There are several problems with assigning Sodom and Gomorrah to 1600 BC rather than 2070 BC, as the Bible would better indicate. Distinguished professor in Old Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary, Eugene Merrill, author of A Kingdom Priest, A History of Old Testament Israel, shows in a recent Artifacts article that for Tel El Hammam to be Sodom, one must deny all the biblical dates before the time of the judges. He states this: however, both archaeological and biblical chronological data rule out Hammam as a candidate for the patriarchal Sodom. After a great deal of analysis, Collins has concluded, based on stratigraphy, pottery assemblages, destruction layers, and architectural features, that the evidence points to the late Middle Bronze II period, 1600 BC, for the cataclysmic overthrow of the site, thus necessitating a date for the Abraham-Lot narrative at the same time. But this is precisely at this point that Hammam must, on biblical chronological grounds, be precluded from being a candidate as one of the cities of that narrative. And he gives these points for consideration. The chronological system of the Hebrew Masoretic text places the era of the patriarchal period, that's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, from 21 to 1700 BC. All subsequent biblical historical accounts no longer jive with each other or fit the period to which a 1600 date assigns them. Besides the dismantling of the biblical chronological schemes and the rendering of their dates as incorrect and or meaningless, other numerical features such as the lifespans of the patriarchs must also be discarded, or radically reinterpreted. Most serious of all, he says, to the conservative scholar at least, is the methodological fallacy of testing and assessing biblical information in light of presumed archaeological primacy and the necessary shift of the ground of authority from text to tell. Meaning, where do you place your authority? Do you place it in the biblical text, or do you place it in secular scientists' hands who are interpreting scientific findings? And to me, this is a huge problem. Just in general, when you're deciding what the truth is about this world, do we place our authority with God's Word and interpret the scientific findings ourselves consistent with God's Word? Or do we let this authority rest with secular science? Their interpretation of scientific findings, we accept those as true and then reinforce an interpretation in the Bible based on their assessments of the earth? This is how we run into problems with the fossil record, for example. You accept their interpretation of the fossil record, and then you force such an interpretation in the biblical text, or do you assume the biblical text is true and interpret the fossil record based on an understanding that there was a global flood? Well, shifting the grounds of authority from text to tell is a significant concern that Collins seems a bit guilty of. This is taken from Collins' own website. He says, on the one hand, it is intellectually dishonest to dismiss the Bible as a site selection parameter. There's no doubt that the Bible remains one of the best ancient geographical texts available to archaeologists and historians. And particular interest is generated in certain sites because of the potential biblical connections. This is reality. On the other hand, doing archaeology solely from a biblical perspective can mean missing the larger reality of Near Eastern culture milieu. A biblical hermeneutical bias might possibly influence the interpretation of data, which ironically could otherwise be used to illumine the biblical narrative itself. Again, the question is, where do you place authority? In my opinion, if we trust in the Bible and the chronological data that we have from the Bible and use that to assign the dates to these archaeological sites, we'd go a long way in correcting these dates. Especially, and one of the things we're going to look at is in our next lecture is Egypt. And as we will see, there's some serious problems with Egyptian chronology as well. Well, a question, before leaving Sodom and Gomorrah, a question that you might want to ask, we might want to ask ourselves is, why did a righteous man like Lot choose to dwell amongst the Sodomites, who were so wicked and sinning greatly in this manner? Well, perhaps we could ask the same question of ourselves. I mean, we're living in a pretty immoral city ourselves. Why was Lot living in such a city where such immorality was going on? Well, in a city, life is easy. You got facilities, plumbing. Here we got electricity. You know, what was Lot's choice other than living in a city? Was living out in a cave. I think we'd ask the same question ourselves. Do you challenge the immoral behavior of your society in a way that would make waves and cause you to be potentially an outcast, to be, we tend to judge people in the Bible, but if we can turn that around on ourselves frequently, and I think with Lot, we got to ask the same question of ourselves. What are we doing to challenge the immorality of our society, of our culture? I mean, there was some terrible stuff going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, and it wasn't just homosexual behavior. We tend to think about it like that. This was institutionalized pedophilia, if we understand what was happening there. And boy, I see us shifting in that direction ourselves pretty bad. We need to stand up and protect these kids. We need to do something about abortion. What are we doing to challenge these horrible things that are going on in our culture? I mean, doing anything significant about it today could end you up in jail. I mean, people are being put in jail for picketing outside abortion clinics. I mean, it's what are we doing?